Muy buenas a todos.
Hello, everybody. I'm the first speaker, and I'm nervous. This is me. These are my social networks and everything that my colleague just said, and the different conferences where I've been presenting things, Outer, Navaja, etc. And first of all, I'd like to thank my colleague Alfonso, who's been helping me out with all the conferences and growing professionally in the area of security, etc., etc. But let's get down to business. I'm going to be speaking about social networks, free networks, and the ideas based on the users' privacy. And there are many. Okay, we're going to go into the problems of traditional social networks. Whoops, that's better. That's with a microphone. Traditional problems like toxicity, commons, addiction. And so, therefore, what solutions have people implemented in order to be able to communicate? We have different solutions, microblogging, blogs, and what conclusions can we draw from this, and what measures can we put in place in order for these social networks not to end up disappearing? So, what do we understand? What do we mean by a social network? In the first place, we have a platform, Facebook, etc., and then a social network, which is a whole structure of people who want to communicate. This is really important, and we need to understand this very well. And the first problems which you will see is toxicity and messages in any social networks like Twitter. You cannot send messages without offending anybody, and some people write negative, offensive messages, and this leads to a very mean atmosphere. And there's a couple of networks that are trying to make sure that people will not write anything that just comes out of the blue, because you may hurt people, you may some people may feel offended, or there's also threats, etc. So I summarize this by saying that there's a lot of toxicity. You may complain, but without offending anybody, without meaning offense for anybody. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is addiction. This happens in free social networks and in conventional networks. You try and compare yourself and make sure that you're better than everybody else. When you see somebody in a social network and you don't know what's going on, you want to connect to it. Everybody wants to go in and see what it looks like. So there's a lot of fluctuation of users. Many come and go. So network grows, then it drops, and it shrinks. And it's not like when people create accounts and they just leave them there. And another thing that I wanted to say is that since people try and compare themselves, this may generate depression, anxiety. You need to use them. You need to be online all the time. And these happens with conventional and free networks. And then there's a whole issue of censorship. There's a bad sort of censorship, which is the whole platform, as is happening in many countries with Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. And there are some associations that are trying to make sure the internet will be free. But like I said, this censorship is bad. If you need to communicate, you're going to start seeing alternatives. And the best thing is to know what they are, instead of having them there and just block them and having people look for other channels that you won't know. This is why I believe that this censorship makes no sense, because people are going to keep on communicating. And there's another sort of censorship which is more interesting and which has to do with contents, especially with pornography, with X-rated things. And then there are some strange channels, like a kid who had a hormone problem with one nipple, one female breast and a male breast, and one of his nipples or breasts, only one of them were censored. So we see problems like this, and there are places you can resort to when your content is censored. For instance, showing pregnant women, something that is nice, but others believe that this should be censored. In any case, these are things we can use. And also the issue of money. Right now, there's only content in advertising. If you use LinkedIn, it'll say, sign up for this master's course, but everything's like commercial. And there are some solutions that say you have a platform where you can upload your data and let the media use them. Yeah, so this is done with bitcoins or crypto coins. You can give your data, but not to a specific company, but to a platform so that people may use them. And then we see changes in the price. We see more and more data, so that prices go down. In the old days, you could sell your data for $60, $70, and then they're worth cents. The only thing with this is that there are more people, more data are generated, so obviously there's going to be this drop in prices. What I'm going to tell you is an introduction of why. Well, in this presentation, we're going to see how people try to look for alternatives because of the problems we've seen before. An interesting thing is that they need to keep existing. We cannot avoid toxicity or addiction, but monetizing is something that doesn't appear anywhere. A social network doesn't keep your data, doesn't sell them, doesn't use them because this is based on the fact that everybody will set up their own social network, and you can sign up or create your own if you're not interested in this one. So they are free. There's no company backing them. They're all independent projects. The only problem with this is scalability, because it so happens that when there are many users who realize that this is a good solution for them and that they like the way they can communicate with smaller groups, so people start signing up, and then this platform falls because if there are too many users, it simply won't hold. And then the good thing about this is that this room manager who or administrator who sets the limits. Here you see what happens when you allow users to just do whatever they want and free to act. And this is just a summarize of all the different free social networks we've been analyzing together with Alfonso, like I said. So there's also a Twitter was created. The first part has to do with microblogging, and the rest will be blogging or enriched blogging protocols, etc. And this is the protocol on this slide. URL. It's very well set up, and here you can see the whole ecosystem of free social networks. And depending on the protocol, some of them interrelate, intercommunicate, and you see how messages are sent from one to another. And these are based on the distribution. They also have their for instance, and they can all be connected. You don't need to be in a specific one in order to see the messages that are going back and forth. First of all, there's a conciliation through Fediverse. And well, this is just to give you an idea of the whole ecosystem that exists. Here's the red Fediverse, and this is based on microblogging, different servers that can generate messages and allow them to communicate regardless of where you're registered. You can see other people's messages as long as they share the protocol or the status. So here you can see the map, and what we're seeing here is all the free social networks, and the largest one is the one we have here, which is Mastodon. And the one that is more used is more broadly used is Mastodon. It started being used in Japan very much. It's very trendy. You can send messages that would be censored by other social networks. So all of a sudden there were like 500,000 users all of a sudden. So in order to make sense out of all of this, there's Mastodon, there's Twitter, and other smaller ones, but this is the whole universe, and this is where we have the big one, which is Mastodon, then GNU, Status Mail, Diaspora, and Pump.io, and etc. Fediverse, etc. So this research has been going on for a year, and we started with Mastodon because we saw that there were many problems with security, and we wanted to expand it. Because if you try and understand Mastodon right from scratch, you need to go to GNU Social, and this is based on an open source project. Twitter, messages are generated, and many projects are based on this. And then you have a federation. You look for a list where you can sign up. The problem with this is that this is also, when you look for instances, many of them are no longer there because people have moved to another level, other instances or another social network. There's another interesting thing here. We have Twitter Spain, Twitter Catalonia, Twitter Sweden, and everybody has their instance, and it's based on the language, if I speak Spanish or Catalan or whatever. So this way people can communicate without problems. But an important problem with this is that can we see what is being, for instance, all the messages that are going back and forth? Can I read them? Can I see them? Basically, yes, because there's no authentication protocol. But in any case, there's a limit. You cannot see the first tweet that appeared. But in this case, you can, because the messages are sequential, so that you can look up all the messages in different instances. So you can do some mapping and go, well, this has been open for 2 years, and you can look at all the messages and all the conversations that have been held. And there's the issue of stalking. Here there's no limitation. You can start listing and saving messages. And here you have many messages. There are millions of messages, and so etc. And also with users, here you can find out, well, all the users in what network. You can tell whether they're administrators, because the first thing you do is to sign up as a user and become the administrator. So the first IDs are the ones that correspond to administrators.
Si no veis nada raro, es un problema. Cuando tú quieres registrar.
The problem with authentication, for instance, when you can see that this is not. Here we see that with GNU, there's no captcha.
Bondes enteras de usuarios, pudiendo llegar a hacer denegación de servicio. ¿Por qué? Porque, como os decía, la instancia de una persona tiene un servidor con unas capacidades,
denial, there's a service with some capabilities, and if you create 200,000 users, no more will fit in. You can do it just with a petition, create a post, and you create it, and then you have a user and another and another. A different thing is content. You don't know who the user who's creating the account is. There's no problem regarding who's behind an account and data, etc. This has to do with content. Whatever you're discussing there is something you can see, and you can see what everybody is saying. So you need to be careful with this, because depending on what you say, you may get in trouble. Messages and users in Twitter, for instance. This is easy. You create an account, you send a message, and then you have the level of the last user and the last message. So you go back and you simulate the maximum amount of users. For instance, more or less you have an idea, a rough idea of how many users or how many messages I need to pick in order to have my own database. There's no limitation whatsoever. The IP doesn't ask for anything, you just do petitions, and there's no sort of no type of blocking or delays or anything. All users in the Twitter network, you can have them in 4 days. Messages 40 million, and you have to one by one, but this is just a machine, a petition per second. If you do it well, you can have them all in a month. But from the house, all the users in the network in 4 days is a very interesting thing or possibility. So let's move on to Mastodon, which is the one that may represent or present more problems. Mastodon is GNU based. Was created in 2016, and especially when it's full of Japanese, so the amount of messages in Japanese is huge, I can tell you. Beck is an application in order to see this. So if this is that, why invent a new one? You just copy it and you put it in yours. And then the amount of characters, it allows for 500.
Aquí ya directamente te ponen 500 y a lo que quieras. Es microblogging, pero más extenso. Te permite content warning, te permite...
This allows for content warning, and you cannot fix messages. There's no advertising. It's much cleaner, much purer. Where do you connect? Here we have Mastodon instances, the more widely used, and those that are censored. If you have one, you don't want to receive those messages. Here, this allows for hatred, pornography. This is what is more censored. There are some instances that just scan these messages as spammers. And for instance, the Russian network, social troll Academy. There are many more, but these are just examples, and it doesn't matter what you like, you'll find it there. If you want to find a group of people who like the things that you like, you can find them here. What about security problems? Can you monitor messages or users? Well, you inherit it. It's generated by GNU. There's no limitation. You can see the messages one by one or 40 in groups of 40. Here you can pick a group of messages, 40 messages, for instance, and you can do all this in 4 days instead of a year. There's no authentication, no limitation, etc. So the graph, this is a very small instance, for instance, and this allows you to see all the existing relations, all the mapping, what users, who talks to whom, how many, I can see how many messages you've sent, and you can do a whole map. It's possible to do it on a small scale. You cannot do the whole network. Real time, you can make your network grow. For instance, if they're using keywords, power, whatever people are interested in, and you may say, well, I'd like to know what's being discussed here, and it's free. All you need to do is to just get in and the issue of start stalking. You can create all the users that I deem necessary. If I want 200,000 users, I just do a petition to get the authentication token. I send the post to the instance, and then it sends me a captcha, it sends me a confirmation mail, and then you set up your account, and instead of creating an instance, I put the whole listing of 1,400 instance. Then you create what is called a transversal sub of a user with the same email account in all instances. Instead of having a single user, you can control 2,400 in only just one email address. And you can say, well, please give me a captcha because there's a problem, so have a captcha because it's not difficult, or else I may get in trouble. There's the issue of phishing is interesting. In here you can ask to be validated. So in these social networks, the green tick in Mastodon, for instance, in frequently asked questions, what you see is an icon. But who reads the FAQs? So with a green tick, and if nobody looks at it, some people may believe that this is the real account of the president of the government, for instance. It's his name. But since it's private and since nobody knows who's behind an account like this, could be anybody. So you could impersonate somebody, and there's no technology that allows you to control this. There's some issue where it says, well, because of development problems, we cannot do it, so please, kids, behave. And so what if I want to create accounts, but not in all the existing instances, but to end users in one same instance, one only instance? So I need to check my mailbox. So if we have a job mail, for instance, a temporary one, I can a job mail, I can create all the users I want. So here, let's say, create 100 users for me, and this, and in just a matter of minutes and users, you can have whether tokens, you can do anything, you can do spam messages, or so Mastodon doesn't allow you to erase, to get rid of users, because the developer said, well, if what you need to do is to go into the database and you erase them by hand, but there's no tool to wipe them all out. And in some places this is implemented, especially for inactive, non-active users, because some people just try out the technology and they just leave. So Mastodon is the most famous instance, Mastodon.social, and every once in a while you're blocked because not everybody can fit in. Now there's 700,000, and if you are generating users, you can deny service, and if you put this in all 2,400 there's a problem. What about if you have transversal users, or you have a web server, or if you have advertisements on the web and start sending messages? This is like with any other social network. The only problem here is that the message only appears a few seconds because it keeps scrolling down, because people keep sending messages, so the message doesn't stay there fixed. So, for instance, in the 2,400 people, when I sent the click, it was just once, it was seen once, only in 10 seconds. Maybe you could visualize it, view it, see it for a second, but 4,700 people. Saw it. But it's very difficult to control. And finally, and there's an example.
There was this other example with cover channel. There was an instance, and this is for real, they would use the dolphin language. And this is no joke. So we set up a coding in order to send coded messages using this, so we could send this kind of message using this kind of coding. It was kind of cool because people don't know what is going behind the scenes, and you can use this sort of channels in order to exchange information. You just use an instance with a lot of activity and send the messages through that way. So this is the microblogging network Feedivers. As you know, the microblogging instances need to use captchas because otherwise they're in big trouble. Then we have Pump.io, which is kind of different. They don't consider themselves as microbloggers. They are group-based. Then there is the activity pub and activity string protocols that are also used by Twitter and Facebook. It's all based on exchanging messages, subscribing to a message feed. It all has the same basis. So you subscribe to a list and you don't have a general feed. You just have a group of users and decide which messages you want to watch, and you are sent only those kind of messages. That is different from all the messenger applications you know that are totally different. In this case, there are very few users, very few instances. This one hasn't been really successful, and the number of users has gone down from 170,000 to only 20,000. This is also based on StatusNet. But in this case, it went somewhere else. They used the core, they edited it, and they set up this social network. As you can see, there are very few instances published. There are two different things. When you create an instance, you want people to know about that instance and to get logged in case you want to have people talking about a particular topic. But then you can create an instance that you don't want people to know about, and you just want a few number of users talking about that. And here you can find dirty things and, well, not very nice things, so to say. So, as I was saying, there are groups in Catalan and Galician language and Spanish. When you subscribe to one of these groups, you know more or less what they are going to be talking about. It's no surprise. Even if it's free, that doesn't mean that they are not organized. People are actually a lot better organized here than in Twitter. There is this funny group called Pirates of Galicia, and in Spanish you have Open Off that is about programming. When it comes to login, there is no captcha. In some cases you have an email access, in others you don't, in others the process is closed. So starting up an account isn't as simple as it looks like. When it is closed, it lets you derive the authentication to other Pump.io servers. So you don't need to have an account. You can have an account somewhere else, use that account, for example, the one with data mouse, you can use that one. You can go to the authentication step and start sending messages, using cover channels, etc. The authentication is derived. So, for example, think if you have Instagram and LinkedIn, you don't need to authenticate yourself in both. You authenticate yourself in one, and behind the scenes, you can use that account in order to use the applications of any of them. The authentication is just in one place, and you can create your Pump.io instance, have your credentials there, and then there is an authentication derivation. This is quite interesting, and I think it should be looked at because it is quite a good solution for authentication issues. when it comes to authentication in Twitter and Mastodon, Pump.io, you can list the number of users, you can create maps, you can see how they are related among themselves, and in this case you need authentication in order to know who your users are. But there's this application that shows all your users on a panel, so you don't have to do anything. You connect to this URL and you just query the users you have on that social network, and here you can see how many users you have, etc., without creating programs or applications. As I was saying, the network is small, and as I said, it has several problems, and we have finally Hubzilla and Diaspora share the same protocols. This project that we can see up there, Federation, is made up by 4: GDU, Diaspora, Hubzilla, and Social Home. But they are not balanced in terms of user numbers. Basically, we have this list, just like in the other ones, which is based on the fact that everything is known and published. You have all the listings with instances. You can see how many active users you have, in which country they are. So if you are into monitoring data and knowing the issues that are discussed, you can find all the data here. You cannot know how many people are currently active on Twitter unless you get yearly summarized information. However, here you can get that kind of information for free because they want these networks to be known. So Diaspora is actually the one that's been more successful. It has 653,000 users, whereas Friendica and Social Home and Hubzilla aren't as successful because they haven't created the need of knowing that social network and connecting to it. All the data are available, as I was saying, and if you want to analyze what's going on in these social networks, you just have to log in and start working on it. Hubzilla only has 480 users, but it's really cool, and it was supposed to be very successful. However, it wasn't. It's quite similar to Facebook when it comes to the panel and the organization on the website. It uses just a few nodes. There are more and more users, but it's not really becoming a success. The reason why is maybe people don't know about it, or they prefer Diaspora or other kinds of interfaces. I thought it was interesting anyway. They have 430 users, and I said, but they only have 30 nodes. That's quite surprising. But here you can see the list where you can connect, and there are many different versions. People create an instance, get connected, and they decide to use that instance or use another one. But in the end of the day, there aren't any large numbers in terms of users. The problem is the usual one, no CAPTCHA. So I can automatize the registration process. They ask for your email account, so you have to confirm your email address, but still there is no CAPTCHA. So I can create users massively. I can have my users stored and perform massive spams whenever I want. I can use cover channel and have people connecting between different social networks, etc. Here, now we go to Diaspora, where they talk about pods. They call the instance in different ways in order to make a difference, but the idea is the same. Independent people who interact. This project starts in Kickstarter, and Mark Zuckerberg invested on it. He thought, well, this is interesting because they are replicating what I do, but I don't want to go too far from them. Just in case they start using it, I might need to get back and say to them, okay, I gave you money in order to start up, so now behave. So they started in 2010, and their goal is literally to create Facebook without using your data. That is, I want to create a platform with the same facilities that Facebook has, but I don't want to make money with your data. I want to do things differently, etc. But they are not looking for publicity tracking, recommending purchases, etc. It's free, and it's a smaller number of people. They want to continue with this idea of sharing and work in the same way as Facebook, but they want to have a different business model. In diaspora, the nodes are all over the world. You can see them on a map. They have 275. The number of messages is growing, but when you look at the history of active users, you can see there is a peak in 2015. I've been looking for information, and I really haven't found the exact figure, but my intuition is that in the social network, they don't want to have zombies or inactive users. So after a while, if the network hasn't been used, these users are just deleted. This way, they avoid congestion problems. So in that point, in 2015, they decided to get rid of all the users who hadn't used the application in 2 months, because it was impossible otherwise. Half of the messages here in Fidiverse come from diaspora. In this case, the difference is that we have the CAPTCHA. Diaspora said, let's do things right, the project is very good, and we need to use CAPTCHA because authentication works a lot better with CAPTCHAs. And that is very good. They also ask for your email address, and once you've created your account, the metadata of all the pictures, videos, and things you upload are automatically erased. By default, they just get rid of them. And they give you the option of sharing those data if you want to. They allow you to connect to other social networks, so this means that this project is working well. If you take a look at the CAPTCHA, you can see that this is not a Google-like CAPTCHA. This is maybe 10 years old. If you go to Linus, the OCR gives you tesseract. And from an image, you can pull out the text that it has. So what you can see here is that from a URL, you get a hash, that is the ID of the number, and then a time. And that time did nothing but, or made nothing but noise. That number didn't change every time I accessed the page. So you can actually remove this from the request and ask the image without noise. So what about creating a program that pulls out an image every time you use it? You can actually create very easily a CAPTCHA database and crack those CAPTCHAs, because you can tell people whenever you get this ID, you will get this CAPTCHA. So it's very easy to create as many users as you want. But if you have tesseract that requires 5 digits with different characters, etc., if you get rid of the noise, it's even easier. So in 50% of the cases, you were right. So every time, for every 2 requests, one was right. So if you know about wrappers and how to surf on HTML, you can make this request very easily, and you can create as many accounts as you want. When it comes to the contents, this is the interface, these are the posts, and the question is, do they use sequential IDs for all the comments so that I can list all the users and comments with GNU, Mastodon, or Pump.io? The answer is yes. If I use the first ID, the one that is Hello Diaspora as alpha, If I use that very first one, it is 7 years old, so I can set up my program from number 9 on, and then with the Join Diaspora instance, I can see absolutely all the messages in this social network. Pretty interesting, isn't it? So, the way I see it is that if I would like to know what the first message on Twitter was, it's impossible because it isn't stored. But here it is stored. You can see the subjects of discussion. You can see also statistics that come from the instance itself. You can see absolutely everything. That is very good. And there are no limitations in terms of API. When I tell you that you can create a list, the IP isn't going to change. There is no control whatsoever, so that's where the problem is. If they are sequential and I don't need to predict anything, I just can make a list. Here you can see that the ID is a hash, and in this case you cannot list the users from the beginning. The only social network that doesn't allow you to know who all the users in this network are, because every time a new user was created, a new number was created, is this one. Here you can look up for them by name, but it's more complex. It's easier maybe when you try to look for administrators by looking for people who have admin in their usernames, but you cannot look for all the users that were created. This is something that is under control by them, so to say. So, to summarize, this is the best of them all. Now, for you to have a better idea, you can see that Mastodon is the larger one. And if you see the blue line, it is connected to GNU and Friendica. Why? Because they share the same protocol. From GNU, we have StatusNet, Friendica, then you go to Diaspora, that goes back to Friendica. So this is what I was talking about, sharing a protocol. If I had a user in each of the social networks, I could create a channel to federate the message and communicate among themselves without the network knowing, because you are talking to the entire ecosystem at the same time. In summary, these networks aren't thought for content's privacy, but for user privacy. You can see the entire content without authentication. You can list all the users except for Diaspora, and there is no control at all. There is no API limitation. There is no limitation of time, for example. So you can create the map that we just saw even bigger, because you can know how many users there are, how they are interrelated, etc., etc. The phasing problem isn't often tackled, but it is a serious one, because if these networks get a lot bigger, I can use characters that were successful in some social networks and try to impersonate them. I can also use some malicious links as well. So this is all about design here. How do I do in order to control all this? How can I avoid impersonation? Because this is not well thought in terms of development. When it comes to automatization in the creation of users, you need something. You just need internet, with the exception of Diaspora. In Diaspora, if you can use Tesseract, you can do it, so you can crack it every time. You could create as many accounts as you wanted in all the social networks that you would want, causing a DOS. In Mastodon, this is even more serious, because you cannot delete it. You don't have an admin panel in order to delete users one by one. That's the most serious one. But in terms of content, you can perform a total denegation. And that is a problem, because they are all interconnected. They all federate the messages. Because, for example, when you crack Twitter, you don't crack Facebook and LinkedIn at the same time, but here you can. You can crack all the instances, you can generate loads of contents. So I can actually bring the entire ecosystem down and leave 1 million users without service. When it comes to phishing, it's the same thing. You just have to deceive the administrator because he's the only one in control. I had this fun story that someone told me that someone who would follow a user with a spider every time, and people started realizing that there was a spider following them. So I didn't want to be banned, so what I did was to save this. But in another case, they caught me and they banned the program that was scanning all the users. This is the same story with phishing. If I make my message as real as possible, and if the administrator doesn't know about it, I can reach more people. With cover channel, there are many different ways. You can use it in the instance itself. You can set up a cover channel with one single instance with even in capital letters and in small letters are the only ones allowed. And then you can create an account with Mastodon and another one with diaspora. If you have the users inside the networks acting as channels, I can forward that message back and forth without people knowing what's going on. So this is a sort of phishing that cannot be detected. The problem is that the users have to know each other. You have to know the IDs of people sending and receiving messages. So what are the countermeasures that can be used? Please use a CAPTCHA. It's for free and they give you the code. So use it because otherwise me or somebody else can just create 100,000 users. Another factor, I don't know if they have this in diaspora, but most of these networks don't have a second factor. There are no other controls. When it comes to sequential IDs, it's important to have, not to have them. You can go from 1 to 100,000 and cover all the users in the network. The same in diaspora. I don't use sequential messages because I will be able to gather as much information as possible. Then you need to authenticate all the requests. You cannot allow a company using your social network in order to send their newsletters with their own subscriptors. Anyone using this social network can see what you're talking about because you don't need to log in. Finally, the APIs need to be limited. This is a basic thing, otherwise it will grow until it bursts. If you cannot handle more, well, in this case, you can use as many requests as you want, as long as the machine allows for it. If you are stalking people and creating many accounts, you can bring the machine down. Even if it doesn't look like it, I like these free social networks. Although it looks like they are going to fall apart, they are good, and they are a good alternative when you get tired of LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, all the advertising and all the messages that are constantly criticized. I like this alternative. Here we have smaller groups, so it's easier to connect and to have normal conversations. And according to your likes, you have an instance thought for you. For example, there is an instance about Game of Thrones, if you're into that. Security is an important thing. It's very serious that GNU and StatusNet haven't done anything for several years. They need to use CAPTCHA and many other things, and this is an important source of information for us analysts. If you want to find messages in order to test, you can use these networks in order to get the messages and do your analysis and your analytics. Another important point is that there is no censorship in these networks. They are controlled by the administrators. So when I started investigating about these networks, I was trying to look for a group talking about dangerous things in order to find out what happens when they are talking about dangerous things, for example. So what you find is that there are no offensive messages. The minute there's somebody who wants to insult somebody else through a message, people just send that message to the administrator, and that user is banned. People are a lot more sensible here. One may think that because this is free, people are going to be watching porn and saying terrible things all the time. But it's not like that. They let you do whatever you want, but you don't do that kind of thing because you give the social networks their real use, that is communication. So it's interesting to think about why people aren't using these social networks in order to post things that cannot be posted on Twitter. That's the interesting thing. They are more respectful communities. They are not so interested in conflict and confrontation. So that's what I had to say. I finished a little bit early. Maybe I was speaking too fast. But, well, I can now answer any questions that you may have if you are interested in knowing more about anything.
Sí. Espera, así te oyen. Dime.
Yo, si por ejemplo estoy registrado en Mastodon,
So if I'm registered in Mastodon, could I register within a node in Diaspora? Yes, but Diaspora is Diaspora asterisk social network, and they don't share the same status with Mastodon. So what you can do is use the same email account to be in Mastodon and Diaspora at the same time, but you cannot derive the authentication. I think that's what you're talking about. So what I am proposing is, or what I'm saying is that GNU and Zilla, well, you could create a bot, a user there, so that every time you use Mastodon, that message is sent over to Diaspora so that the entire network is federated. So you would use Mastodon only, and all the messages would be federated in the social networks. The ones that have the same protocol, they just reach up to a certain level. If the instance is federated, you're going to watch the same thing in both social networks. But if you also use GNU, you can use it in order to be redirected to Diaspora. And Diaspora is great. It is just Facebook without the advertising. Actually, the topic of being automatically registered in Diaspora was a subject in Diaspora itself. It's really cool. Did you know about Mastodon? Mastodon is pretty well known, but what about Diaspora or Pump.io? GNU is the oldest one. It is more old school. I don't know if you've ever heard of the free social networks. No? So, thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Miguel.